Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with my special guest, Brandan Rader. How are you, brother?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure, absolutely. You do a lot of things, which is why I brought you on, but we're going to talk about something very specific today, and that's your matchmaking business. How did you decide to get into that realm?
Well, so my background is in behavioral psychology, and I had worked in a lab focusing on healthy habits. And my whole business started being predicated on lifestyle consulting. Essentially, how do I give people the lifestyle tools and resources to shape the lifestyle that they desire? And so, in focusing on these health behaviors, I also started focusing on the process of habit formation and really just cultivating this foundation for my lifestyle business. And what I had found was that a lot of my clients were single. And the reason why they were coming to me was because they wanted to focus on improving themselves before they got into their ideal relationship. And so, as I was journeying through this life transformation process with them, many of them started inquiring on dating services and matchmaking services. At the time, I didn't provide those services. And so, I first started diving into date coaching, where I would help people with interpersonal relationship skills and then also help them with online dating and then also playing the occasional wingman. Uh, and so then one of my clients had really expressed a desire for matchmaking. And this prompted me to go out and start seeking matchmaking services because one of the services I provided for my clients was an affiliate service, which means that if I didn't provide that service myself, I would develop a relationship or with an affiliate where I could refer them and we would work together to help this client achieve their goal. So my client just so happened to be connected with Patty Stanger from the Million Dollar Matchmaker. And he ended up reaching out to her and her business associates. And I interned with them for a summer. And so I was under the tutelage of Patty Stanger for a summer. And then from there, I sought out some matchmaking companies here in Denver that I could partner with. And that's how I ended up with Elite Private Search and It's Just Lunch. I started out doing contracted work where I was focusing on still the date coaching and the styling, and I would refer my clients to them as candidates. Candidates are the people who meet their clients. And then when the opportunity arose to partner with them on the matchmaking level, I took it.
Awesome. Congratulations. I can't imagine what that experience was like working with the Million Dollar Matchmaker.
Yeah, it was a wild ride.
Well, we met on Facebook and I wanted to bring that up, and you messaged me. And normally when a new connection matches or excuse me, when a new connection reaches out over Messenger, it's like right away to pitch oh, here's my nutrition company, or here's my travel company. I want you to come be a part of it. But you waited a few days and you authentically slid up into my DMs. So if if our listeners are wanting advice on how to approach somebody on a social media network via Messenger, I'd send them to you because you did it absolutely flawlessly.
Oh, well, thank you. I love that. I am good at sliding into the DMs. That's hilarious. I love that.
That's really funny. So date coaching came from behavioral science and now into matchmaking. And, your authentic approach through Facebook Messenger is one of the reasons why I felt like I wanted to bring you on today and kind of uncover a little bit more about what people experience when they come to you for your services.
Yeah. So from the client perspective, a lot of people are coming to us because they are either fatigued from online dating. They're busy professionals and they don't have the opportunity to go out and meet people in their everyday environment. They're not going to bars or not going to social functions or single mixers. And so for them, it's not that they don't want anyone special in their life. It's just that they don't have the time to do the hours of sorting. And so what we do for our clients is we do that sorting for them. I actually like to look at ourselves as almost like romantic recruiters. And so when you have like a professional recruiting company, you have a client and they have a very specific position that they want fulfilled. And instead of sorting through hundreds of applicants themselves, they hire a recruiter to sort through applicants for them and give them a handful of the most qualified candidates. And then they will meet with them individually to decide which one's the best fit. And so that's exactly what we're doing just in the matchmaking realm.
I totally get it. And as somebody who's burnout on online dating, and I wouldn't use the word frustrated, but just not going to go that route anymore. Plus, I'm a busy professional. And when somebody like yourself has a matchmaking service, it might be right up my alley in order to save me time and that frustrating part of the sorting process.
Yeah, I mean that's where we get a lot of people is it is tough out there. The market is glutted in the online field, and with that comes an abundance of scammers and misrepresentation. And I think that it also comes with a glut of people who aren't using it for the right reasons. So I can definitely sympathize with people why they also want to work with a matchmaker.
Yeah, totally get that as well. And it would not be in anyone's best interest who comes to you and actually like misrepresents themselves through the interview process, because then they're going to end up with the same results as if they were going out there misrepresenting themselves on their own.
Absolutely. That's actually one of the reasons why I like to reach out through social media. In fact, even if I meet someone, because under normal circumstances, I'm going to anywhere from like 2 to 4 events a week. And during this, I'm recruiting. I'm essentially like looking for quality singles that I could connect with our clients. And so even if I meet them in this environment, I will then try to add them on social media so I can get an idea of who they are, pay attention to their posts, because I think that that tells you a lot about someone. You can also see, is there photos of another person in there that they look like they have a romantic relationship with? Are they super political? Are they making inappropriate comments, etc.? So you can get a good idea of someone's uh, authenticity through social media. And that was actually one of the reasons why I reached out to you. I loved the stuff you were promoting. I liked your platform, and so I paid attention for a few days, and I was like, cool, I'm going to reach out to this guy.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, it might seem repetitive on my social media where I'm talking about jujitsu or my daughter or Colorado outdoor adventures or whatever, but that I was having this discussion with a couple of guy friends as we went to a hike on Saturday, and that exact thing came up. He was talking about who he sees online, and it's always like, oh, outdoor this and hiking that. And well, those are all qualities or values that I would look for in a partner because we could adventure together. And I'm like, okay, well, it sounds like there's an abundance of what I'm looking for out there. It just
Right.
so happens that when you reached out, I wasn't really dating on my own at that time.
It's timing. Timing's everything. Having the opportunity present itself is sometimes, I would say, more rewarding than going out and seeking it, because that can become frustrating, right? If you're just constantly focusing on what you want or the process or the outcomes. So I like it when timing works out that way.
Right? Kind of like a chase versus an attraction mentality.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I think the chase is synonymous with burnout. Like I'm working so hard to build this framework of an ideal relationship in my mind, and then also going out there and finding somebody to fit into that framework.
Yes. Oh, and I love how you said that. So I actually I had made a post a while ago about talking about how a relationship is not meant to be a template that you fit someone into. A relationship is a story that two people write together. And I think oftentimes we create this predetermined script in our head of what a relationship should be or the type of person we should be with. And then we try to go out on that chase and find someone that we can fit into it. And we try forcing them into it. And either one, they just don't at all. And then we get disappointed. Or two, we do it enough where that person is then like, I'm never going to be the type of person you want to be. I'm out.
Hmm.
Don't like me for me. Uh,
Hmm.
and so I'm like, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't a great relationship. It just means that they didn't fit your predetermined script. I'm like, so sometimes we just got to throw that script out and then write our story as it's happening in real time.
Hmm. I hear what you're saying, and I want to ask a follow-up question of like, Does throwing out the script mean that we throw out our non-negotiables or that we forget about our values-based choices?
No, so how I would frame it is I like to tell people to focus on lifestyle and relationship goals when they're going into it. And that's the script I like people to focus on. And the difference here is that when you're creating a goal, it's essentially more broad, right? So you could, and that could be associated also with values. So let's say you had mentioned like outdoor activities, so maybe your broad category is being active. And so I tell people you start broad, get specific, and then you turn it into a story. So you would say something like, oh, I value broadly, one of my lifestyle goals is to be active. And what does active mean to me? Active means being outdoors, not necessarily just being at a gym, but being actually outdoors. And then you tell a story, and this is a story you would tell on a date. And so then you would say something like, oh my God, so I was up hiking with some buddies the other day. And so when you're telling this on a date, you're going to get a lot of information from the way someone responds to that. Either one, the woman's going to start relating to it because she can compare stories because she has similar experiences. Like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. I actually went hiking a few days ago. In which case it tells you that there's compatibility there. Or they tell you something like, oh, I'm not big into the outdoors. I don't do a lot of hiking. And then they tell you it's not compatible. Or they glaze over the topic, and that probably tells you it's also not compatible because they can't contribute. So then to your point is I tell people to focus on this because that's not writing a specific relationship script. You guys could say, we want to live an active lifestyle, and you guys share that goal, but the way that you guys engage in that and the experiences that you have and how that person contributes and how you contribute is completely unknown. You're not forcing it or trying to make this person do it a certain way or engage in a certain way, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense to me. And it reminds me of a first date that I went on, last year. And we knew enough about each other ahead of time to know that I was kind of a gym rat. And she admitted to me on the first date that's like, I don't go to the gym, but I still live an active lifestyle. And I responded with like, it's not required, but
Yeah.
I do relate to you on that active lifestyle choice because I like
Yes.
14ers. I like hikes. My dog is the best off leash dog in the world, right there on my heel the whole time. So, you know what? A hike is great for me.
I love that. That's a great example. So again, you go to that point and you talk about how, okay, so we both value an active lifestyle, that broad goal. The specific piece to it can be different as long as you're still engaging in an active lifestyle. Like you can go to the gym, she can be doing her outdoors. Occasionally, you guys might have some crossover when you guys want to do time together, but it's also okay to have that separate, and then when you get to people who focusing on those specificities and are really trying to force a script, you would see the opposite where someone's like, no, they have to want to hike 14ers. They have to. Because I do that. And in which case it's like, okay, so you're trying to force someone into a template as opposed to saying, no, we just need to live in an active lifestyle because that's what's the most important piece to me. And the way that they do it and the way that I do it doesn't have to be exactly the same.
I love what Esther Perel says about putting so much on one partner that they have to be our everything, and how that's a recipe for disaster. They have to be our best friend and our counselor and our spiritual guide and etc. Whereas, like, let's just take my life, for example. I've been single for a really long time. I've been going to jujitsu for 3.5 years. There aren't that many people out there that are going to be like, oh, I'm picking Dave because he does jujitsu. And I also cannot basically bring somebody into my life and have that expectation that they're going to join me on that journey. It's
Right.
nice to have that support, but it's not a requirement because that sport is not for everybody.
That's exactly right. I mean, you just really got to put an emphasis on, where is it important to have those crossovers? And I think that the most important the most important crossover is communication and conflict management style. And so I think that those are the things that I try to look for that crossover and where I tell people that it's okay to kind of have a specific on that because if someone is conflict avoidant and someone doesn't engage in open communication, then say you come up to this conflict of activities and what do we do together, what don't we do together. If you guys don't have the ability to communicate about that in a healthy manner, then that conflict is going to turn negative as opposed to it being an opportunity for growth.
Mhm.
Um, So, I mean, I think those are the most important pieces where we need to have that crossover is the conflict style and our communication styles.
Yep, I like it. And I completely agree. And that brings us to the current events that are in our world where we're sheltering in place. We're not necessarily going out on a first date in person. And we could talk about cohabitating couples right now with the isolation equals amplification that my men's coach tells us about, which is that conflict avoidant or conflict resolution style, where cohabitating couples are pretty much either butting heads or they're growing in this period. But let's focus on the singles for a little bit, where people are not in general meeting up in person for the first date. What are singles in your world experiencing, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah. So it's a really interesting time. I think that it actually presents us with a really unique opportunity. So we're offering a lot of virtual first dates right now, right? Through Zoom. And what happens when you're doing a virtual meeting is you lose a lot of context of communication, because they talk about how roughly 93% of communication is nonverbal and about 7% is verbal. And so that non communication percentage is made up of body language, facial expressions, and appearance. And then that 7% is what someone is actually saying. Now, when you're on a first date in person, people are focusing mostly on that 93%. They're not necessarily focusing so much on what a person is and is not saying. And so going back to that concept of the compatibility, focusing on that, it's a concept I call a love life list. And I tell people to focus on compatibility on those first and second dates. And to focus on compatibility, you have to focus on what someone is saying. How are they responding and reacting to your stories? And specifically those stories that are related to your goals, your relationship and lifestyle goals. And so when you start listening to this, you can glean a lot more information about the compatibility because you're not distracted so much by someone's facial appearance or expression or, their body language. And so when we're doing these virtual dates, I'm telling people, yes, you're losing out on a lot of context to kind of assess chemistry. I'm like, but you're gaining a really good opportunity to assess compatibility. And I'm like, so listen to what they're saying, utilize your list stories, and focus on compatibility on that first and second date. And then go on your third date, or maybe it's a second date. Either way, then that's when you meet in person. That's when you can then focus back on that chemistry piece, assessing body language, physical attraction, interaction, etc. So what I'm finding though is that people are having a lot of positive intellectual exchanges. And they're saying, wow, no, I see the compatibility there. I feel the connection. But I'm not sure if the chemistry is there. And they're like, I need to meet in person to be able to assess that. So I think that I'm telling, that for people out there doing the quarantine dating and doing the virtual dates, I think that they really need to capitalize on that opportunity for the compatibility assessment through virtual dates, and then try to assess chemistry later on when they can meet in person.
It sounds a lot like how people used to date. The guy would call up the girl, ask her out over the phone instead of text message or through the app. And that was their first initial conversation where they didn't have body language. They didn't have facial expressions included. They simply just listened to what the person said. And now that we have technology to do that over video, it helps us to understand, well, is there a little bit of attraction? Do I want to go out on a first date?
Right. Yeah. And what's so interesting is that, again, so I tell people chemistry does not equate to compatibility, and compatibility is the key to longevity. And so the reason why a lot of people end up in relationships that aren't healthy or relationships that don't last is because they're focusing on chemistry. They are not focusing on compatibility. They want that instant attraction. And sometimes it can relate to or equate to compatibility, but not always. And so when we are focusing on, well, again, what someone is saying, we can really hear them in terms of, are they in alignment with our goals? Do they want the same things we want? And that can prevent us from wasting our time down, in the long run, where you'll hear this a lot, or at least I hear this a lot in the dating world, where someone will talk about that chemistry piece, and they'll talk about, well, this is what I was initially attracted to. I liked that they were tall, dark, handsome, or funny, slender, athletic. They go into those specifics of the person that usually is associated with chemistry, physical attraction. And they're like, but then, and there's always that but then, or else they wouldn't be single. But then, I wanted to get married, they didn't. I wanted to have kids, they didn't. I wanted to travel, they didn't. It's always the misalignment of those relationship/lifestyle goals that leads to the dissolution of relationships. So when you're just listening to exactly what someone is saying, you can really find out, is this worth my time? Is it worth my emotional investment? I think it's also ironic how you'll hear people talk about, in hindsight, that they knew that person wasn't right for them. They'll say, I should have known they weren't right for me. They always used to do this, or they would say that, or they would do that, or like they would never let me do this. And you ask yourself, well, why would you stay in a relationship with this person? And it's usually because of that chemistry, why I was super attracted to them. Or there was a strong fit. We had a good physical relationship or a strong physical connection. But they knew that it wasn't right. And that person was telling them everything that they needed to know to make that assessment in the beginning. They just weren't listening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we hear what we want to hear.
Yes, we hear what we want to hear. So, right. And then we make justifications for it or excuses. And I find it very interesting. So now we have the opportunity to really listen. We're forced to listen to people. You have to listen to what they're saying.
That's right. That's right. It's helping us through the pre-screening process. And personally, it helps me make the choice of, what is my intuition telling me about going on an in-person date with this person?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's your experience. What you're experiencing is what most people are experiencing. And if you use it strategically, I think people are going to end up in a really good place.
Definitely. And I'm trusting my intuition more now than ever. And it reminds me of a saying that the things you ignore in the beginning are the things that will eventually come between you later on down the road.
Yeah, I love it. They're the things that we always end up regretting, right? And you always thought, I knew that. Oh God, if I would have only listened to myself. You
Or
think
that
that
red flag or this red flag.
totally. Yeah, I agree with that.
But you're doing everybody a service by pre-screening the red flags. And you're kind of narrowing it down on the compatibility side.
That is right. So most of what we do with our screening is focusing on that lifestyle and relationship compatibility. And then of course we are taking into account physical attraction, the aesthetics that someone is attracted to, and again, the most important thing from my perspective is the lifestyle and relationship compatibility. And then chemistry is intangible. We don't really know how to spark it or what creates it between two people. So from that point, I feel like I do a good job, or I can say it's a job well done if two people are compatible in their relationship and lifestyle goals. Because then what happens after that is out of my hands because it's chemistry and I don't control the chemistry between two people. If I did, I'd be a billionaire.
You would have the get rich quick or the key component to sending people off into the world with
Yeah,
success.
exactly. I don't know what the world that would be a crazy world. Could you imagine if someone knew the actual catalyst for creating romantic chemistry between two people? I think that would be an interesting world where you could just pick any person you wanted, and you're like, cool, I can pick whoever I want, and I can just make chemistry happen like that. It'd be an interesting world because it would take out the idea of, I guess, serendipity, free will, the forces of nature, powers that be.
Mm-hmm. You can't want it enough for the both of you. So if one person is attracted to the other and the other one just didn't feel it after the first or the second date, I know I've been there on both sides before. You can't want it enough for the two of you. And that's not going to help you build chemistry or compatibility.
Right. I mean, it's just a waste of time because if you know deep down it's not going to work and you try forcing it, or you either way, whether you're the person who, doesn't quite feel it, but you want to try to make it work because you like this person on some level, or you think that you should like this person on some level because maybe they meet all of your check boxes, or vice versa, where you really like that person and are really attracted to them and you want to make them like you, but usually doesn't work out favorably if you're forcing it.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like the fact that you brought up wasting time. And I'm all about saving time. I'm all about saving money. Business owner on a budget, right? So when two people are trying to discover if they're compatible with each other and they're consciously dating, this is something that we're working on here on our side at the podcast of defining what conscious dating is. And it comes down to the point of like, one person hears from their intuition that like, this isn't the right fit for me, but they stay in it and they don't set the boundary for themselves and for the other person of simply just saying, hey, it's been great, but it's a no for me. And I want to let you go find it what it is that you're looking for out there.
I think that's really important. I actually recommend that people do a 3-date minimum. And I have this formula where I recommend people assess compatibility the first and second date. Third date, you use to assess chemistry. And I have a concept called the ABCs for the ideal third date to assess chemistry. A is activity based date. B is body language conducive. And C is candid self inquiry. And, what I like to suggest here is that once you assess that there's compatibility and then you give the opportunity for chemistry to flow or develop, then you can make a fair assessment. Is there a full connection here? Yes or no? And if you say yes after the third date, then that's when you gently tell someone where you stand. Say not too much pressure, not like I'm in love with you, I'm ready to marry you, but something along the lines of, I think you're really interesting and I've loved getting to know you and I'm looking forward to learning more. And if it's a no for you, if you've assessed that there's either not enough compatibility or not enough chemistry, I call it BTW. It's by the way, I'm not interested. And B stands for be positive. T stands for tell them that there's either not enough compatibility or not enough chemistry. And W is wish them the best. And, so like start positive. Wow, I've had a really fun time with you. You're a really funny guy. But for me, I feel like there's not enough chemistry there. But I definitely wish you the best because I think you're an amazing person and I hope that you find your person. And usually people feel comfortable at the third date taking this type of rejection, or you could say taking this type of, you could call it like a conscious separation, or that, things are a match, because 3 dates is a good amount of time. Also, if you're really focusing on assessing compatibility and chemistry, then you're actually coming from an informed state. And if you tell them that there's either not enough compatibility or not enough chemistry, that takes away the thorn in our side when we're rejected. And the thorn in our side is the unknown. That's, well, was it me? Was it something I said? Was it something I did? Is it how I look? Why don't you like me? What's wrong with me? And it's no, you take that away when you say it's just there's not enough chemistry or there's not enough compatibility. And usually that's enough. Some people might ask for a specific, well, what do you mean? And you could say, well, I just feel like I am into a really active lifestyle. And I know that that's not really something after the third date. I've realized that's really not something you're interested in. And it's so important to me. So that compatibility piece just isn't there for us. And it's important to me, so again, it takes me to that unknown.
Yeah, I would definitely want to ask you a question about that. That's very insightful. And I guarantee it's going to go a long way for our listeners. But on that third date, if we're giving the explanation of like, I'm into an active lifestyle, it doesn't appear that you are, then they could actually kind of personalize that a little bit more and say, oh, no, but I am. You just haven't given us enough time for me to show you that I'm an active person. Like, is that kind of a part of the scenario that could come up? Do we really need to give that kind of an explanation at that time?
For the most part, I would say no. I think that it's best just to be be broad, telling them that there's either not enough chemistry or not enough compatibility. The only time that I would go into more specifics is if they ask for it. If they say, well, what do you mean about compatibility or chemistry? And then you go into the specifics. And at that point, don't ask a question unless you want the answer. I would say the best is that you can be candid in a courteous way. But it's fair enough for you to say, okay, I'm going to tell you. If you ask me, I'm going to give you a direct answer.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. I was definitely kind of like a little anxious over here on kind of feeling that could be taken personally at that time,
Yeah,
definitely don't ask a question you don't want to know the answers to.
exactly. And I think that here's the thing is that 3 dates is actually a long time for most daters. So again, that third date point is usually a safe place to let someone know what's not quite there for you, because they're like, okay, yeah, 3 dates is a good amount of time. I'll ask people when I'm interviewing people for date coaching. One of the questions I ask them is, how many dates do you feel like it takes to assess chemistry? Most people say one. And I always say, no, 3 date minimum. So most people after the first date are saying, no, bye, see you later. And so asking someone to do a third date is sometimes challenging, and I get a lot of pushback from that. So I tell people, 3 dates is a lifetime to a lot of daters.
No doubt about that, especially in our swipe right onto the next type culture right now. And
Yeah,
one of the foundational principles of the podcast here in our community is that self-awareness. And self-awareness goes a long way to understanding that, like, on a first date, it could be a no for me, and to set the boundary, it's not going to be a second date. And that's okay, totally okay. But if you have enough, maybe not a percentage of compatibility on the first and the second date, then give it a shot, go for it. If it doesn't turn anything, you're at least going to learn something about yourself, improving your self-awareness along the way.
100%. I love that. I actually recommend again to a lot of my daters that that dating is about the I and relationships are about the we. And so when you're focusing on the I, that's about what do I want? What do I need? What can I learn? How do I feel? And it's that learning process, it's that discovery process. And then once you start getting into a relationship, it's how do we feel? What do we want? What do we like? What do we need? And I also tell people that dating should be about discovery, not drudgery. And so if you're not discovering something about yourself or the process, then you're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm. And when you're describing the we, Stan Tatkin calls it the couple bubble. And how much of an overlap of the I and the I coming together to become a we? Because then we start to talk about codependency and interdependency, which is a really good thing in a relationship. I'm
Yeah,
dependent on you for this, you're dependent on me for that, but we're also individually intradependent on ourselves.
right. Yeah, I think that it's something, it's going to be different again between every couple, the level of interdependence that they have on one another. And I think that, where you start to see that crossover is when you officially decide to take a further steps into the relationship development phase. And for my daters, I recommend that after that third date. So I say, like, okay, so your guys are going on these first 3 dates. If you're doing the process I recommended, then you've already assessed that there's compatibility there. There's a key ingredient to longevity. Now you've assessed that there's chemistry there. So you know that there's this drive there, to propel you guys forward. And then you go into that fourth and fifth date. And this is when you start moving into more of that integration phase and bonding phase. Like, do I introduce you to my friends? And then if I do introduce you to my friends, do they become our friends? And that's where you start to cross over into that we, from being mine, my friends, and how do I feel about you meeting my friends, versus, here are our friends, and we are now going to be going out with our friends together. And so I think it's like that fine line between where you start with the I, how do I feel about this? And then after you introduce that person into whatever realm it is in your relationship, then it starts to move into the we.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to
I
define what's a healthy level of separation.
Yes, of course, absolutely, and that's different for every couple too. And so is the timeline. Like, just because we're talking about the third date today doesn't mean that we're having the exclusivity conversation at that time.
Right.
Also, we can take time for me to understand who this person is, how do they fit into our compatibility, or the way
Yeah.
that my life exists now. And I think about this a lot. My life as it exists now is new to me. I I don't know um, how necessarily I fit into my own life, and this is me in the last couple months. I've definitely come to face this situational change and actually flourish during this time instead of constricting. This has been a tremendous momentum changer for me and a growth phase for me. So I'm eternally grateful for it. But that timeline is really what we're talking to people about right now. By the third date, there's compatibility and chemistry, but you don't necessarily need to know that there's exclusivity or that it's like happily ever after.
Right, 100%. I agree. And I think that for the most part, you've just assessed that by that third date, that there's the necessary components for a solid connection there. And then after that, it's still all about the exploration of the I and where do you stand? How do you feel? And then you decide like what's the appropriate time to start progressing more towards the we. And I just think that the third date's just like safe territory to assess that the components are there. But you're right, that timeline needs to be appropriate for each person. I also think it's a good conversation to have with people about like what their timeline kind of looks like, and you don't have to ask it so explicitly like, so what's your dating timeline? Are you looking to get married in the next year or have kids? I think it can be something, it can be more subtle. It can be something established through your love life stories. You can start talking about on the second date, you could talk about some family activities that you have coming up, or some, maybe you have a trip planned with friends and you start telling this story to demonstrate, maybe you love travel and you're talking about a big trip you're going to be taking with friends and family. And you can see what their responses are. Do they say, oh my God, that sounds amazing. What a fun trip to take. I would love to go on a trip with like some friends and family. In which case that signals to like, they are subtly suggesting like, I would love to go on a trip like that with someone I was dating. So that tells you what their level of openness is to that, and gives you an idea of general timeline, right? Might tell you something along the lines that they're open to this process of integration sooner rather than later. Or they might say, oh my God, I wouldn't even imagine doing that. I like doing like solo trips. I like, traveling on my own. Or I can't foresee myself really traveling in the next few months with all the craziness happening out there. I'm not really open to travel. And then right there, they're telling you that they're really not open to that concept at this stage. And so that tells you that maybe their stage for integration is going to be a little bit further down the line.
That makes perfect sense to me. And I have a couple examples from my life that comes to mind. This year, I was planning to take my daughter to Greece in September because I turned 40 in July. She turns 18 in August. She just graduated high school, and I wanted to celebrate that with our first international trip together. When I'm dating now, I tell that story of like, hey, I'm going to bring up this disappointment that I was planning this trip in September, planning it since last year. But because of the gym shutting down and I lost income, I have to put it off. And shoot, we don't even know if we should be traveling to Greece at that time.
Right.
So this is kind of a serious opportunity for me to kind of open up, be a little vulnerable, which is scary for a lot of us, talking about how this last 3 months has really impacted my life on a shared interest like travel.
Yes. I
That's
think that's
one. Yeah.
a great example.
And then last year, I met a girl in person at a friend's birthday party, really attractive. And from the first date or two, I started talking about 2 trips that I had planned end of June, beginning of July, where I was going to be out of town. And as I was describing these trips, definitely for 2 reasons. One, to prepare my potential partner that I would be out of town. And then 2, I never received any movement forward on interest of like doing that together. And why I chuckle now is because the trip to Michigan was the only one that I had a +1 to this wedding. Out of 3 weddings last year, that's the only one during the time that we dated that I had a +1 for. And based on like the feedback and maybe the not confronting or avoiding that conversation altogether, I cannot invite somebody I just met 6 or 8 weeks ago to go to Michigan with me on a weekend to a wedding.
At least with her timeline, I mean, who knows? Maybe you might have been feeling it. But that's a great example. Like, I love that, telling a story about like a wedding or like a personal engagement where you have like a plus one. I think that's a big conversation for a lot of people. Like, when do I invite someone to a plus one event? When can someone become my plus one? That's a
Definitely after the exclusivity conversation.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that it gives you a good idea of where that other person stands in terms of their level of integration and their readiness for integration.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree with that. And I chuckle because like neither one of these situations or these stories that I tell on the first few dates is going to change the outcome of our relationship at all. I was excited about the 2 weddings I had to go to last summer. I was excited to travel by myself also. When I had booked these trips, I hadn't anticipated meeting somebody and dating them throughout that time.
Yeah.
This year, I actually used this conversation of I had a planned trip to Greece. I'm disappointed. I'm sharing this opportunity to build more connection and to determine some more compatibility with my partner,
Yeah, I think
potential partner.
really great story. One, it does a few things. It talks about how it shows that you're family oriented. It brings up the subject of children, because a lot of people like, when do I bring up that I have kids?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, don't make it awkward. Don't make it a thing. Just tell a story. So the other day I was at a supermarket and my daughter and I, first we went and got a mani and pedi or something, and then we went to the store. Or my daughter and I went to this football game or something like that. It's a story where you mention who you were with, and if it happens to be kids, and then they can ask more details if they care. How
Mm-hmm.
much is it? How old is your kid? If they care about it, they'll ask the details. If it bothers them, then they're probably not going to want to pursue a relationship. You'll get a good idea based off of the way someone responds or interacts with you. So it shows that you're family oriented. It brings up the kid. It talks about travel. It shows that you're vulnerable. It talks about the stresses that you're under current situations. That one story accomplishes so many things and tells so many explores so many details of your life just in one
Mm-hmm.
simple story. So I love that.
Yeah, I've got a couple of go-tos besides the Greece story, which is more about like my experience this year, but it also includes my daughter. It lends to the follow-up question of like, oh, do you travel a lot? Have you been to Greece? Has your daughter ever been to Greece? Things like that. But I have this go-to story because my daughter is the funniest person I've ever met, in spite of me, not because of me. And I take her and I tell it just like this. I take my daughter on daddy-daughter dates, every other weekend. We go to lunch or we go to dinner. And recently, she's 16 at the time. We're driving through the small town that she lives in, and she's giving me directions to this restaurant she wants to go to because it's her turf, not mine. And we drive past this hair salon, and I'm like, "Hey, Maddie, you see that Aveda salon? I used to get my hair cut there when I lived in this neighborhood, and Adele, the owner, used to cut my hair with a straight razor. Best haircut I've ever gotten." And my daughter turns and looks at me and she goes, "Adele, huh? Did she call you 1,000 times?" And what that does is it just opens up this really levity moment in a date where I find it's appropriate to tell that story. It shares that how much I care for my daughter because she's so funny. She's just, most of her jokes are pointed at me, but that's all right.
I love that, and I think it's great. It shows that you value humor, and it shows again the level of family orientation that you have, which I think is important for painting a picture in terms of compatibility with someone. Because if someone, say, doesn't have children and they don't understand that, and they're wanting a partner who is not super engaged with their children, and that can reflect in a few different ways. Oftentimes, it reflects in the way of a person discussing the age requirement of a person they're dating in terms of their child. So, well, they need to be grown and out of the house because I want a partner who can devote most of their time to me. And so I think
Hmm.
for you, it's actually valuable to talk about because your daughter's 18, so she's older, but still expressing the level of interdependency that you guys have with each other. I think that's really important for any potential suitor for you to be aware of.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And I've dated a lot in the last 3 years of being single. And when that story first occurred, it wasn't that long ago, probably a year ago, maybe even last summer, because she's still 17 when she graduated. I started telling this story to everybody that I knew, and people really enjoyed that connection from me with Madison, but also the way that I share what's going on in my world. And it's a special moment for the two of us, and I hold on to it. And the more I tell it, the more fun it gets for me. And then it clues me into a lot of values that the person across the table from me has.
Right?
And it's a story I can tell early on in the dating experience too. I don't have to wait until date 4 or 5 or 6 to let somebody know I have a kid.
Right, exactly. I also think that, the best part about telling stories is it's more engaging in terms of a form of communication, and it provides you details that you can't get from interview slash listing style responses. And that's usually the default form of communication on like those first 2 dates. I feel like it's like a environmental, like a psychological cue that when you are sitting across the table from someone new, your automatic mode of conversation is to go into interview style.
Mm-hmm.
You always have this role where someone ends up the interviewer and another person's the interviewee. And when I hear feedback on dates from people who get into this mode of communication, you always hear the interviewer saying, I felt like I had to do most of the talking. I felt like I had to dig information out of them. And the other person does it was like, no, we had a good conversation. Talking about themselves, answering questions. It was easy for them. But it is just a common mode that we go to, but it also doesn't provide you the details you need. So other than being not being a form of communication that's conducive to romantic chemistry, it's also again going to be devoid of some of those details. You could ask me, Brandon, do you like travel? And I could say I love travel. Doesn't mean the same kind. It doesn't mean it's the same kind of travel that you love. You
Mm-hmm.
could ask me if if I'm family oriented or if I like kids, and I could say I love kids, but that doesn't mean that I want to spend time around them. I could just be like, sure, no, I mean, I'm fine with them. They're great. And then, but if you say, oh, like what kind of activities do you like to engage in with like your children? I could be like, what are you talking about? They're always with the nanny.
Oh,
Um, you
ooh.
know, I love them because I don't have to deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
So when you tell stories, it just gives you those details, and the way that someone responds and contributes that story provides you the details you need to know. So much more than just asking questions and waiting for 1 word, 2 word responses.
Yep. And that brings to mind, I love that explanation. It brings to mind a question, and it can be framed in both ways. Oh, so you have kids. Or let me scratch that. Oh, you have sisters. What was it like growing up with two sisters? And then I'm definitely answering the question about how many sisters you have, but I'm also, recalling back to my childhood what it was like to have two older sisters. And then I get to share a story where my sister put rubber bands around my ankles and made me hop down the hallway. She thought it was hilarious until I fell on my chest and knocked the wind out of myself. Okay, so my sisters were bullies and I was a little short kid. And then I can go into that story of how I was always undersized. And then thank God for jujitsu, because now I can stand up for my sisters.
Oh, it's funny. It's true though. I mean, the way that we do ask questions, is it open-ended? Is it a close-ended question? Always aim for the open-ended questions. Give people an opportunity to tell their story.
Mm-hmm. Stories go a long way to build connection. And I know your time's valuable. I really enjoyed our conversation today. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you if your story resonates with them?
So reach out to me on social media. I'm on Instagram. I am on Facebook. I'm also now on TikTok. I just started. Don't judge me on my horrible dance skills. Or they can feel free to reach out to me through Elite Private Search's website. On there, it has my business email as well as my direct office line if someone's interested in being a candidate. And if they have any other questions about dating, relationships, or matchmaking, I'm available. And again, reach out to my social media or professional website.
Got it. Thank you. I'll put all that information in the show notes below, but you said candidate, and candidates don't pay, but clients do. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. So candidates, it's free for them to meet our clients. Our clients are the paying party. They've hired us to go out and search for quality singles on their behalf. So the only thing that it costs candidates is about 45 minutes of their time to meet with me so that I can learn all about who they are and what they're looking for.
Got it. Awesome. And before I let you go, what's one thing that we briefly touched on, didn't get to, that you want to expand on?
You know, I think that we covered everything that I wanted to discuss today, but something that I really want to emphasize is that opportunity for virtual dates right now. I know it's a weird world, and I know that a lot of people are adversive to this concept of online dating and Zoom dates. But again, it does present a really unique opportunity to assess that compatibility piece, which is key to longevity in a relationship. And then now that restaurants are reopening, we have the ability to practice safe social distancing in outdoor spaces. Save those dates for that third date. That's that activity-based date where you have the opportunity to get a good read on body language and you have the opportunity to assess chemistry.
I want to say thank you, Brandon. That's really good advice. And I know that I can take it with me as I get back out into the dating scene for the first time this year. I'm super grateful for your advice, and can't thank you enough for spending the time with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine, Brandon.